Alright, this is video number 3 on stride rate. Stride rate, or cadence, or RPMs, as I'll be calling it, is how many times 1 foot hits the ground per minute. So I'm going to use 1 foot per minute, not 2 feet per minute. A, it's just a smaller number. Smaller numbers work better for me. And B, it's probably an old cycling cadence habit that will probably never fade within me. First and foremost, I do not put as much stock in this magic number of 90 RPMs as the rest of the run community. I don't see it as like the standard that we all have to hit. I know the sale of metronomes has probably increased, or there's probably an app on the phone now that will tell you your RPMs. So when I say that it doesn't have to be 90, I'm not implying that we have to run with a slow cadence. No false dichotomies. There's always individual freedom to hit something in between. So when I talk about 90 RPMs, the main point here is that sometimes it's just unnecessarily or unnaturally high for too many runners, and I'll explain why that is. It's not made for everyone. I know that a good percentage of you, as I mentioned in the last video, a good percentage of you have improved your running form because you did pick up the lean, and I said, maybe it's overrated, maybe you don't need it. And that's okay. Keep leaning if it's working for you. If switching to a higher cadence around 90 RPMs has worked for you, I certainly agree. I want my athletes to run with that cadence too. But I will not force them to have to hit 90 for me to be convinced that they're keeping injuries away or that it's somehow changing their foot strike. But you have to consider, for people that have made the change and it was successful, huge world of difference, you have to consider what their stride might have looked like before they made the correction. For instance, a lot of times it's a long, slow, looping, bounding stride where short and quick definitely is a better improvement. So here's what I mean by that. So if that previously was somebody's jogging stride, where their foot is always coming way up here and it has this bigger impact into the ground, and they're maybe taking 76, 80 strides per minute, then yes, I agree that a shorter, quicker stride would certainly meet with a lot of improvement. But there's one key word missing. So a better phrase to use in getting these corrections is a relatively short and quick stride. There's a difference between short and quick, short and quick, short and quick, short and quick, and a relatively short and quick stride. And I'm willing to bet, because I've made this correction in hundreds of runners, that when you switch to a short, quick stride, you had a lot of room for growth. You were previously running with that long, slow, looping, bounding stride that I just demonstrated. There's also a certain subpopulation within the run community who's more likely to run like that, and I will go over that in a couple minutes. But if you're running in gear 1 and gear 2, you're supposed to keep your feet relatively low to the ground. As we start to run faster and we increase the stride length, and I will hammer home all these points when I talk about stride length in the next video, you have to get your foot higher off the ground if you ultimately want to run faster. There's certainly an upper limit to how fast you can move your legs per minute, and there's going to be an upper limit to how long of a stride you can take as well. But one misconception that exists out there is that you are sacrificing stride rate in order to run with a bigger stride, and that is not true at all. So we're all in agreement that relatively shorter, quicker strides is the way to go, but I am emphatic about keeping that word relatively in the mix at all times, and I'll explain in a little bit where that word comes from. Relative to what? I will show you. But where I think I deviate from a lot of the run community, I won't say everyone, but where I deviate from a lot, is that the rest of the run community is really emphatic about getting that cadence up around 90. I agree, it has met with a lot of success for runners, but now we have to start to talk about individual wiggle room here. Does it have to be 90? In my mind, no. As long as you are above 80 RPMs, for the most part, they're going to be okay. I've gotten a lot of runners who are down around 80, 82, 84, and I've gotten them to 86, 88, 90, and it's been a better stride. Again, a little bit less impact into the ground potentially, and possibly even moving faster through space. But what I think happens is when a lot of runners, read that article or watch a video, pardon me, and they just get short quick. It's like short quick, short quick, short quick. Okay, boom, got it. And then they run like this. And tell me you haven't seen hundreds of runners running this way. So what I just demonstrated there, and pardon me from having to go back and forth on the runway, I'm not using the TED Talk microphone because it's cutting out a little bit too much when I tested it out. But you saw that, basically that really fast walk that I just demonstrated. So the reason that the really high cadence and reinforcing the notion of short, quick strides reinforces a heel strike, as I turn this camera down to the ground a little bit more, is when you are really working to get that cadence up and get that cadence up, and your feet are staying low to the ground, your lower leg is basically just turning into this fast swinging pendulum. You're not really getting any lift off the heel, so you're being forced to put all of the action into the front part of the stride, so it's causing a heel strike. Now, it doesn't have to be this big, ugly heel strike that I'm demonstrating here, but most of the runners I coach who come to me with these short, quick, short, quick, short, quick strides, it's a lower leg pendulum swing. As I bring the camera back up, you'll also see that when they go to sprint or do even like a third gear, fourth gear workout, and when they try to sprint to the finish line in a 5K, and they're always wondering, why does everyone always out-sprint me to the finish line? Even the people next to me who are dog tired, what's happening? What's going on? And I argue that it's been so emphatically put in their head, either by the outside information or themselves, to run with these short, quick strides to get the cadence up around 90 RPMs, that even when you want to kick it in, if you're one of these runners, here's what your third gear stride might look like. So again, pardon me, I only have a short runway to work with here, but when that person goes to sprint, what you will see or not see, you won't see their foot getting any higher off the ground. And I always say it's kind of like a game show with a lot of these heel strikers in the fast cadence. It's like if I took 5 snapshots of you running in gears 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I shuffled them up to win the grand prize, and we all had to put those 5 images in correct order of you running from 1 through 5, like we might not be able to do it, because every photo looks exactly like this on the front end and that on the back end. You just have that fast swinging pendulum. So that's why I said in the intro video, I've done this for over 1,000 runners. Washington, D.C. is a very diverse population, and I've coached it all. I should be seeing way more runners putting their legs through bigger ranges of motion to go faster. I do understand that I'm getting into stride length now a little bit in the conversation, and that getting your foot higher off the ground means greater impact into the ground. So for other reasons, age or body weight or history of injuries, not everyone really trusts themselves to do that. So this lower leg swinging pendulum that kind of resembles walking, like that's the default setting, and it does feel natural. But you have to know that there's a whole nother world out there of running faster. And no one's saying that you have to run your half marathon that look like you're sprinting. If you looked at the guy who just broke 2 hours in the marathon, there's certainly nothing short about his stride. I do understand he's on a whole nother world anyway, but you get the point. So when you go to sprint in 5th gear, tell me if you look like this. So that answers the question, how fast do you really think you're going to go to outsprint someone to a finish line if your foot never gets, any higher than that off the ground? You have to understand that there's a limitation to how fast cadence is going to take you. And again, if you're thinking about how this has helped your foot strike, you're still heel striking, but now you're just heel striking with a faster cadence than you were heel striking before. So I understand this is a preview into the stride length video, but the reason you're getting out sprinted all the time, or why your 200, 400 meter R pace workouts on the track aren't that much faster per lap than your tempo pace, is because you're not really giving yourself any increase in range of motion with the leg. You're not ever really getting up at or above the parallel line. You're just relying on those Tasmanian devil legs to go around and around. And think about how many of you were told by your physical therapist or chiropractor, or maybe an orthopedist who was connecting some dots, you know, hey, you need to engage your glutes when you run. And you don't really know what that means, but with that short, quick running stride, you're never giving yourself a chance. Everything's down here. You're never giving yourself a chance to engage the glutes with the bigger stride. That kind of comes with a third, fourth, and fifth gear stride with this greater hip extension and hamstring pull through. And again, I'll explain more about that when I get into stride length. All right, so a quick side note here on lab studies that will then transition into understanding what makes the professional runner so different than you and I. So first quick note on lab studies is that I understand that it's usually kind of a good mix between looking at amateur runners and professional runners, but in general, the lab studies are looking at avid runners, well-trained runners, people that have been running for a very long time. It doesn't always mean professional, but there's more force plate studies being done on fit folks than unfit folks, or trained people versus untrained people. So there's a little bit of a selection bias that you have to take the results with a grain of salt when you're looking at this. And certainly anytime they've just done like a freeze frame, play-by-play in slow motion on these professional runners, that is an extreme selection bias. And here's how we have to understand that. There is a distinct reason the elite distance runners around the world can run with a cadence of 90 RPMs and sometimes faster and hold that for so long. And this is one page of the professional runner's playbook I don't believe we should all be trying to mimic. There's a time and a place to take certain pages from the professional playbook. If you've ever read The Sports Gene by David Epstein, it's a wonderful book, I highly recommend it. His chapter 12 explains in a very clever way why the pro runners can run with such a high cadence so naturally and effortlessly. So what makes the Kenyans and Ethiopians, for instance, the world's best distance runners? We can't say that it's altitude, because most top distance runners around the world are all training at altitude these days for extended lengths of time throughout the year. We can't say that it's just because they're highly motivated to win, because most professional runners, they're all highly motivated to win for various reasons. So we have to try again. They've all certainly probably been running from a relatively young age. And we have to consider then what makes these professional runners unique. We've got a combination of all these factors, but it's also not just simply a matter that they are more fit than you and I. The answer is, and this gets back to Epstein's book, it is their small ankle mass. So they tend to have really skinny ankles. Now, what does this have to do with you in your running form? Well, some of you might start, or have done, you're looking down and you're looking at your calves and your ankles, maybe even your shoe size, and realizing, okay, I think mine are on the big side, but even just compared to some of these world-class distance runners. And you wouldn't be wrong in making that assumption about yourself. Think of it another way. For some of you triathletes who are watching this video, you have maybe bucked up and spent about $200 to $300 on a pair of cycling shoes. Or you can just ask in general, why do cyclists spend so much money on cycling shoes? It's because they weigh as much as this little remote control in my hand. So when you spend more money to get a lighter shoe, and even running shoes try to get into this as well, you have smaller, lighter, rotating mass down attached to your foot. So you can spin your feet on that bike in a circle at a much higher cadence, or whatever cadence you want, but with less energy expenditure. So what does this have to do with your running form? I think there's a lot of you out there who are trying to force yourself into these higher and higher cadences. And based on your either ankle mass or perhaps your total total leg mass, it's just not working for you. It feels really goofy, it feels awkward, it feels really unnatural, and maybe some of you have even slowed down significantly, because in order to get your cadence up that high, you've really had to chop down that stride length. So you can attempt to go for the cadence of 90 plus, but I think this is one page we don't have to steal from the Pro Playbook. As long as you're above 80 RPMs, there's probably a reason you're down around 80, I'll get to that in a second, then I think you're okay. I believe, just as I mentioned with lean, there's probably more important elements of your stride and strength training that you could or should be focusing on as an amateur runner than seeing this as like the magic bean that's going to change everything. And again, I assure you, after 12 years of experience, all my high cadence runners, they're all still heel striking. I'm okay with a heel strike, depending on what kind of heel strike it is. I'll talk about that in the fifth and final video, or the fifth video. But hopefully I've just shed some light on a little bit more individuality when it comes to cadence and stride rate. All right, so for some of you taller runners out there, maybe some of you male runners over 6'2", or female runners over 5'10" or 6 feet, you've maybe tried to make this change to a shorter, quicker stride, and as I mentioned, it might not be feeling good, it might not be improving your performance or keeping the injuries away. I know for most professional male distance runners, they're about 5'6" to 5'10", maybe 6 foot. Female elite distance runners are going to be 5'4" to 5'7", maybe 5'10". Just again, depends on maybe the exact distance. So relatively shorter legs is my point. Relatively shorter height, relatively shorter legs can move at a relatively higher cadence. So it's a bit of an advantage. So if you're on the taller side, your advantage is the longer legs. And you've noticed this in some of the races. You don't have to take as many steps to keep up with that person next to you. So again, I don't believe you have to run with a slow cadence, relatively high. Just try to keep it up above 80, 82, but you shooting for 90 might be throwing off your mechanics and really chopping down your stride length and slowing you down. And I think similarly for anyone out there with just overall bigger leg mass, we could say thicker thighs. You might know if you have thick thighs or not. It's going to be tougher for you to whip those things around at 90 plus RPMs. So to what end are you really going to hold yourself to that? So in a lot of these 101 sessions, I've had taller male runners come in and tell me it doesn't feel right. They're them trying to run, 6'4" former basketball player trying to run with this really high cadence. I mean, it looks as goofy to me as it feels for him sometimes. So again, the main point is don't force the issue. You can look down and do a quick test looking at your calves and ankles. I'm mostly joking, that sounds pretty superficial, but you just want to find a good balance, like what fits your overall body mass and what fits your overall leg mass. So if some of you are looking for a bit of peace of mind to not have to do what every other runner is maybe trying to do with this high cadence, I think you're okay. So again, a misconception that as you increase your stride length, that range of motion behind the body, that you're going to decrease your stride rate. All right, going back to the arm swing example, right, I talked about how longer levers aren't as efficient as shorter levers. So when you run and you have your leg always down here, that is a longer lever. It's either not as efficient in third or fourth gear as getting some lift off the ground and pulling your foot through, or this is taking more energy than this. So when I get my heel off the ground and I pull through, this is a shorter lever. This is how I keep my cadence up as I increase the stride length. And related to these last couple points, a lot of you out there are former college athletes who played soccer, basketball, lacrosse, field hockey, and you spent most of your life, not just in college, but building up to that, you probably played a lot of sports where you were sprinting all the time. You did a little bit of jogging with your warm-up laps, and occasionally once a week, coach might have you go run 3, 4, 5 miles, but most of the time, you were attacking with a pretty good-looking sprinter stride. And you got into the jogging world, somewhere in your 20s, late 20s or 30s, and talking to your running buddies who were giving you advice, they were trying to get you into that shorter, quicker stride. And as I began this video number 3 talking about it, it may have worked for you because previously, I see this when I do a lot of my running 101 sessions and I poke around with those background questions, one of the things I'm trying to find out is if this person was a high-level high school athlete or played something in college. That's going to tell me right off the bat I might see one of those longer, slower cadences when they jog. For instance, they'll run this way. The reason they're doing that, the reason they're kicking their feet up so much is because that's what happens when we sprint. When we take our leg through this big range of motion, and then you just slow down. I mean, they're only slowing down to here. They haven't learned about the really good, relatively short, quick stride to go out and run, 10, 13 miles. So they're trying to get into it. So the short, quick command for them is going to meet with a lot of success because previously they're just beating up their body, a lot of wear and tear by having their foot come down on the ground from so high. That's usually something we want to save for speed work, which, as we all know, is only done, once or twice a week or, every now and then on the weekend with a race, and it's not that much total distance overall. All right, so that's just something for you other coaches to keep in mind is if you have a former ball sport, team sport athlete coming to you, you've got some background info to know that that's why they run and jog the way they do. I'll talk about slow sprinting as ideal run mechanics in some of the later videos, but for them it's a little bit too slow. And then the other thing you can think about is with these laboratory studies, there aren't really a lot of long-term force plate studies where they're looking at people 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later. Did these runners actually get faster in race distances and race performance by going with the short, quick stride? Did they actually keep some of the injuries away? In my experience, it's been a lot of heel striking. And sometimes what ends up happening, because you're keeping, let me tilt this down, because you're keeping your feet so low to the ground, you have to find a way to cover more ground with each step. So basically it just looks like you're hopping over a puddle when you run. So for a little bit more distance, it's you've seen some of those runners. I'll come back in here. So I call it the puddle hopping method. It's like when you walk on the street and you have to go whoop, and you just kind of leap over a puddle really quickly. It's a really big heel strike. So for the runners who do not bring their feet, higher off the ground, more than what we would see in gear one, and everything is always short, quick, in these little steps, they put everything into the front of their stride to cover more distance, to run faster. So when I say that a stride can be a relatively short and quick stride, relative to what? Relative to your sprint, relative to what I'm about to show you, I'll go back and forth a little bit, you will see that a jog stride can still cover some ground with each step. Relative to your sprint, so relative to that stride, this is a relatively short and quick stride. So you can see how high off the ground my feet are coming. Again, based on my body weight, my training history, I can maintain that for 10, 13, 26 miles. But going back to the very beginning of this video, short, quick, I think too often puts the wrong idea about stride in people's heads. It's limiting them as to how much ground they're going to cover with each step, knowing that stride length is behind the body, big or small or medium, versus the extension in front. So that is why, again, faster cadence doesn't necessarily change anything about your foot strike. It's forcing you into a heel strike. So I will say more about cadence when I talk about stride length and foot strike. It's not always cause and effect, but there's definitely a lot of overlap there. So the main takeaway is don't force yourself into an unnaturally high cadence. If it's working for you, then it's working for you. Great, keep it. If you're at 90, wonderful. And you're meeting with success, don't let me talk you out of it. But for some of you watching this who are like 86 or 83 and wondering, can you stay there? Yeah, there's an art to it. What else in your arsenal do you need to level up? You know, is it your stride length? Is it your strength training? Is it your foot strike? What else could it be? Don't get too caught up on cadence. Otherwise, you're way down here just swinging your lower leg like a pendulum. You're never getting your leg back. You're never engaging your glute. You're never flexing or extending your hip, and you're never working your hamstring on the pull through. There's no rule that says you have to run that way. I mean, if your goal is just to go out and run 20, 30 minutes a couple times a week around the neighborhood, you can ignore all of this. But some of you have ambitious running goals. You want to qualify for Boston, which to me is more like gear 2 running than it is gear 1. So you've got to hit a lot more gear 3, gear 4 training throughout the year. You've got to get your foot higher off the ground. You do not have to sacrifice stride rate for stride length. So your cadence is usually fixed, going from jog to sprint, from 5K to marathon, from running through the park, through track workouts. Your cadence is usually your cadence. It's going to be what it's going to be. As you start to run faster and you shorten your lever by keeping your foot higher up under your body, you're able to swing the leg through faster. So we usually see cadence stay the same for a runner. And I'll demonstrate that here. I'll demonstrate here really quickly. I'll skip 2 and 4 because I have a short runway. I'll go 1, 3, 5. You'll notice an increase in stride length, but you'll notice my cadence stays the same. All right, so there's me in my short runway, but that was a 1-3-5 and then a 5-3-1 essentially. And my cadence, if you can slow it down and count, it's pretty much the same. So as a run coach, recognize you want to keep the longer strides that a lot of your athletes have built up over a lifetime. Don't drill that out of them with short, quick, short, quick, short, quick. All right, so as I bring this topic on cadence and stride rate to a close, I will just reiterate one more time, and I know I've been repetitive on some of these messages, but anything worth knowing is worth repeating. So the reason I pick on the unnecessarily high, unnaturally high cadence, because it does force you into kind of a kicking action, which if I bring this down here, you know, it's essentially going to look like walking, right? Walking is heel striking, always has been, always will be, and it's not a big deal because it's only walking. It doesn't put that much stress on the body, but a lot of you are taking that walking stride into your running, and again, the only way you can get to 90 RPMs is if you keep your feet way down here like that low swinging pendulum. And I will talk more about this when I get to foot strike and stride length, but you know, a lot of people want to put the blame on just heel striking and leave it at that, but I'm trying to connect the dot that high cadence and forcing a high cadence is what causes not all but most of the heel striking. And I will also reiterate in the foot strike video that we don't have to change the heel strike, but I just don't want the big heel strike way out in front. A subtle heel strike we will let go, but ideally we can shoot for a mid-foot strike, and ideally we can understand that it's not all about cadence, it's about understanding stride length, and I will get to that in the next video. And just to bring back another point and wrapping this up, concluding, is that expression, you know, engage your glutes when you run. Let me tilt this down one more time. So some of you have been told to engage your glutes when you run. The first thing you have to understand is no matter what your foot strike is, you're not really supposed to engage your glutes in just first gear. I mean, the swing of the leg is really minimal. My glutes aren't getting activated until I start throwing the thigh back and extending my hip. That's probably not going to happen until 3rd, 4th, or 5th gear, again, regardless of your foot strike. So if you're engaging your glutes when you run, then that might bring us full circle to where this video began, and now you're one of those runners with that longer, slower, looping, bounding stride with too much back kick behind your body. In other words, if you're engaging the glutes in a jog, you might look like this. So that's a lot of hip extension behind the body, too much hip extension behind the body, too much glute activation behind the body in just a jog. So it's going to happen naturally as you extend your thigh back along with your glute activation in gears 3, 4, 5. So your PTs have shown you some exercises. There's this one right here where we kind of get into this airplane T stance. We've got the glute activated here, or the single leg planks on the ground, lifting the leg. And both of those kind of resemble that initial kickback when you want to start running into 4th and 5th gear. So we have to understand that there's a time and a place for engaging the glutes when you run. It's not going to be in 1st gear, 2nd gear, or else it's going to look really funny. It's going to happen in 3rd, 4th, or 5th gear. Otherwise, if someone's trying to get you to engage your glutes when you run, they're probably referring to your hip posture, which I went over in video number 2, that your hip posture is off, that your butt and hips are way back here, and your butt is completely out of the picture. These are the biggest, strongest muscles in your body. You want them under your center of mass where they can actually do some work. So if you think about the gentleman who just broke 2 hours in the marathon, I mean, I know it's an extreme example to use, but it would reiterate that, you know, his stride length was tremendous for that whole 2 hours, and it did not really affect his cadence. So I'll segue right now into talking about stride length, and we'll connect more of these dots.